Clara hadn't planned to return to her father's lake house that weekend. Her life in Seattle had become a blur of deadlines and noise, and she needed a break from the endless city lights. When her father, Richard, mentioned he'd be at the old family cabin with some of his college friends, she decided to join him for a few quiet days. She imagined reading by the lake, maybe helping him with the garden, just the peace she'd been craving. But the moment she arrived, she knew this weekend would be different. The sound of laughter hit her before she even stepped inside. The old wooden house was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Her father's friends, Mark, Daniel, and Evan, were sitting around the living room, mugs in hand, retelling stories from their youth. They looked older now, with gray in their hair and wrinkles from years of laughter and loss. But their bond was strong, warm, and familiar. Clara hadn't seen them in over a decade, but she still remembered their names from the photos. Her mother once kept in a dusty album. Her father's face lit up when he saw her. "Clara, you made it," he said, pulling her into a hug. She smiled, instantly feeling the comfort of home. The smell of pine wood, the soft crackle of the fire, and the lake's faint shimmer through the window. Mark and Daniel greeted her with loud, teasing energy, joking that the little girl had grown up into a proper city woman. She laughed politely, but her attention drifted toward the man sitting quietly near the fireplace. Evan. He hadn't spoken much, just smiled softly when she walked in. He was different from the others, calm, thoughtful, and with a kind of silence that didn't feel cold but steady. Like he carried peace wherever he went. Dinner was filled with laughter and stories. The men reminisced about their college adventures, about how they met Clara's mother and how she'd always been the one to make them clean up after their reunions. For a while, Clara felt like she was watching a movie of her father's past, one where life was simpler, filled with youthful dreams and laughter that never seemed to end. As night fell, the lake outside turned silver under the moonlight. The others poured drinks and settled into deeper conversations about life, retirement, family, the things they'd lost and found again. Clara excused herself to the kitchen, trying to soak in the peace that had become so rare in her city life. But before long, Evan appeared in the doorway. "Need any help?" he asked gently. His voice was deep but calm, and she noticed he didn't fill silence with words like most people did. She shook her head with a small smile. "I'm fine. You should be with the others." "I think they've heard my stories too many times," he said with a quiet laugh. He leaned against the counter, watching her as she rinsed a few cups. "You look a lot like your mother." That stopped her. Few people mentioned her mother anymore. It had been 6 years since she passed, and most avoided the topic, afraid to open old wounds. But the way Evan said it wasn't heavy. It was kind. "You knew her well?" Clara asked softly. Evan nodded. "She was the reason your father and I stayed close all these years. She had this way of bringing people together." Clara smiled faintly, remembering the warmth of her mother's laughter, the smell of her baking on Sunday mornings, the way she used to hum near the window while looking out at the lake. "She loved this place," Clara whispered. "She did," Evan agreed, his gaze turning toward the lake outside. "And she loved you most of all." For a moment, the room felt still. No sound but the faint tapping of rain against the glass. There was something about his words, the calm sincerity in them, that made her chest tighten. When her father called from the other room, she turned to leave, but Evan said quietly, "She'd be proud of you, Clara." She froze for just a second. It was such a simple thing to say, but it reached deeper than he could have known. She smiled softly before walking away, carrying the warmth of that moment like a secret in her heart. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, Clara couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the whisper of the wind and the distant sound of frogs by the lake. She wandered out to the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and she remembered how her mother used to tell her that the lake keeps memories. Maybe that's why being here felt like stepping back in time to when her family was whole, when love still felt simple and certain. As she stared out across the water, she saw a faint light through the window. Evan was still awake, sitting by the fire with a book in his hand. For some reason, it comforted her to know she wasn't the only one who couldn't sleep. She didn't know why she felt drawn to him. Maybe it was his calm presence, or the quiet way he seemed to understand her without words. The next morning came with golden sunlight spilling across the lake. Her father was already outside with Mark and Daniel, setting up for a fishing trip, their laughter echoing through the air. Clara made coffee and joined them briefly. But she noticed Evan was sitting apart on the dock, his feet just above the water. Lost in thought, something about him made her curious. He wasn't like the other men. He didn't speak to fill silence, and he didn't seem to carry the same lighthearted nostalgia. There was something deeper behind his eyes, something like sorrow. Or perhaps quiet understanding. When she brought him a cup of coffee, he smiled gratefully. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "You're not joining them?" she asked, nodding toward the others. He shook his head. "I've fished enough in my life. I think I enjoy the quiet more now." "So do I," she admitted. They sat together for a few minutes, not talking, just watching the ripples move across the lake. The air was cool, and the only sounds were birds and the faint splash of water. It felt peaceful, but also strangely charged. It's like something unspoken was resting between them. After a while, her father called for her to help with the cooler, and she stood reluctantly. Evan gave her a small nod, his eyes soft but unreadable. "Enjoy the day, Clara." She smiled. "You too." As she walked away, she realized she had been holding her breath. Something about him, his calm voice, his quiet confidence, had stirred emotions she couldn't name. It wasn't love, not yet, and not something she could ever imagine acting on. It was just connection. A rare, unexpected kind of understanding that felt both comforting and unsettling at once. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the crickets outside, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend would not pass quietly. Something was changing in her, in the air around her, and maybe even in the way Evan had looked at her just once, like he saw something she didn't know she carried. She closed her eyes, unaware that by the end of the weekend, the peace she had come searching for would turn into something far more complicated and unforgettable. The next morning came with soft light streaming through the old curtains. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the house, mixing with the gentle sound of the lake outside. Clara woke up early, earlier than anyone else, and slipped into the kitchen to make breakfast. It was something her mother used to do whenever guests stayed over, and though she hadn't planned to, it felt right. She moved quietly, setting mugs on the counter. The morning air cool against her skin. By the time her father walked in, smiling sleepily, the table was already set. "You didn't have to do all this, sweetheart," he said. "I couldn't sleep," Clara replied, smiling. "Besides, it's nice to feel useful again." Her father gave her a quick hug before stepping outside to check on the others. She could hear laughter coming from the porch. Mark and Daniel were teasing each other about who had aged worse. Their voices echoing through the quiet morning. Evan's voice wasn't among them, and she found herself wondering where he was. When she looked out the window, she saw him sitting alone on the dock, a steaming cup of coffee beside him, staring out at the lake. The sight made her pause. There was something peaceful about him, but also something distant. As if his thoughts were miles away, she carried 2 cups of coffee and made her way down the small path to the dock. The wooden boards creaked softly under her feet. Evan turned when he heard her, but didn't say anything right away. He just gave her a small, kind smile. "I thought you might need a refill," she said, offering him the cup. He took it gently. "Thank you," he said. "You're up early." "I always wake up early when I'm here." "The lake feels different in the morning," she said, sitting beside him. "It does," Evan replied. "It's watching the sunlight shimmer over the water. Your mother used to say this lake looked like a mirror, that it only showed the truth when you were quiet enough to see it." Clara smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee. It wasn't awkward, just calm, steady, and strangely comforting. She noticed the faint lines near Evan's eyes, signs of laughter and time. He looked like someone who had lived many lives, some joyful, some painful. "Do you come here every year?" she asked. He nodded. "Your father and I started coming back after your mom passed. It helped him. Helped me too, I think." Clara looked at him, surprised. You too. Evan gave a small smile. Grief doesn't just belong to families. Your mother was a good friend to all of us. She didn't know what to say to that. For so long she had thought she was the only one who carried the weight of that loss. Hearing someone else speak about it with such quiet sincerity touched something deep inside her. Before she could respond, Ark shouted from the porch, Evan, you coming fishing or not? Evan laughed lightly, shaking his head. You know, I'm terrible at it. I'll stay here and save myself the embarrassment. Suit yourself. Mark called back, waving his hand. When they were alone again, Clara asked, You really don't like fishing? He shrugged. I used to. These days, I think I prefer still water. Clara smiled at that, feeling a warmth she didn't quite understand. She stood after a moment, brushing the dust off her jeans. I should help Dad pack the lunch for you all, she said. He looked up at her, his eyes gentle. Don't work too hard. It's supposed to be a vacation. She smiled, walking back toward the house, but his words stayed with her longer than she expected. By midday, the sun was high, and the air smelled like pine and lake water. Her father and his friends had gone fishing, leaving Clara alone in the house. She cleaned up the kitchen, humming to herself, until she heard the screen door creak. Evan had come back early. His hair was slightly messy from the wind, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. They kicked me out, he said, smiling. Apparently, I scared away the fish, Clara laughed. That sounds about right. Sat at the table, glancing around the quiet room. It's strange being here without your mom. She used to fill this place with sound, music, laughter, something always cooking. Clara nodded softly. It's been quiet since she left. Too quiet sometimes. Studied her face for a moment. You miss her a lot. Every day, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Even after all these years, it doesn't fade. It doesn't, he agreed. But it changes. You learn to live with the missing. She met his gaze, surprised by how easily he understood. There was something steady about him, like he carried his own share of loss and knew how to make peace with it. They spent the rest of the afternoon fixing small things around the house, a loose cupboard door, a broken chair leg, a curtain that wouldn't stay up. It was ordinary work, but it filled the silence in a comforting way. Evan was patient, showing her how to use the tools properly, his voice calm and easy to listen to. At one point, she slipped while trying to hammer a nail, and he caught her arm instinctively. It wasn't much, just a reflex, but the touch sent a quiet current through her. For a brief second, their eyes met, and she felt her heart skip, quick and confusing. He pulled back immediately, clearing his throat lightly. You're fine, he said softly. Just be careful. She nodded, pretending to focus on the chair, but she could still feel the warmth where his hand had been. As the day faded into evening, the sound of rain began to patter against the roof. Her father and the others came back just before dark, laughing about how they caught nothing but memories. The house filled again with noise, stories, and warmth. But through all of it, Clara kept noticing Evan, how his eyes met hers for just a second too long. How his smile seemed quieter when he looked at her later. After dinner, when everyone had gone to their rooms, Clara stood by the window, watching the rain dance on the lake. She didn't expect to see anyone else awake. But then she noticed Evan standing on the porch, leaning against the railing, watching the same storm. For a long moment, she hesitated. Then she stepped outside. He turned when she joined him, offering a small, tired smile. Can't sleep? Not really, she said. The rain's too loud. I've always liked it, he replied. It reminds me that even storms have rhythm. They stood in silence, listening to the rain. There was nothing romantic about it, no touch, no words that crossed lines, but the closeness between them felt heavy and meaningful. Like two souls finding quiet company in a world that had stopped for a moment, when lightning flashed across the lake. She flinched slightly, and he smiled gently. It'll pass soon, he said. She nodded, breathing slowly, feeling oddly safe near him. After a while, she whispered, It's strange how people from different times in your life can show up again and change how you see everything. Evan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's what life is about, people returning at the right time. The rain softened, the thunder faded, and for a long while, neither of them moved. There was nothing to explain, nothing to confess, only the quiet understanding that something between them had shifted, in a way neither had expected. When she went back inside, she paused at the doorway, looking at him one last time. He was still standing there watching the lake, and though the storm outside had begun to fade, something inside her had only just begun. The storm arrived earlier than anyone expected. Dark clouds rolled across the lake by late afternoon, and the wind picked up, shaking the old trees that surrounded the cabin. Clara stood by the window, watching the waves rise and crash against the dock. The weather made everything look more alive. The water restless, the sky full of movement, the world waiting for something to happen inside. Her father and his friends tried to make the best of it. The fishing plans were forgotten, and instead, the men opened another bottle of wine and settled near the fire. Mark played old country songs on the speaker. Daniel told the same stories he told every year, and laughter echoed through the house. But Clara wasn't in the mood for noise. Something about the rain made her restless, thoughtful, almost lonely. When she stepped out to the porch, the first drops of rain hit her face, cool and sharp. The sky cracked open a few moments later, releasing a heavy downpour. She pulled her sweater close and sat in the corner of the porch where she could watch without getting soaked. The smell of wet earth filled the air. It reminded her of childhood summers, of her mother calling her inside before the thunder, of warmth and home and safety. A moment later, Evan appeared at the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said gently, his voice almost lost in the rain. She smiled faintly. "I'm fine, just watching the storm." He handed her one of the mugs. "Then at least stay warm," he said. She accepted it, the hot cocoa warming her cold hands immediately. They sat side by side, looking out over the lake. The rain fell harder, drumming on the wooden boards of the porch roof. Thunder rolled in the distance, deep and slow. Clara took a sip of the drink and said, "I always loved it here when it rained. My mom used to say the lake told stories during storms." Shh. Evan smiled softly. "She said that to all of us once. I never forgot it." That made her smile too. "I didn't know you remembered things like that." "I remember more than you think," he said quietly. There was a long pause, not uncomfortable, but heavy with thoughts neither of them spoke aloud. The air between them felt charged, like the space before lightning. Clara wanted to say something, but she didn't know what. Evan seemed lost in the rhythm of the rain, his eyes fixed on the lake. "You seem quieter today," she said finally. He glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Maybe it's the weather. Storms bring back things I thought I'd forgotten." "Good things or bad things?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "A bit of both. I used to come here when I was younger, before your parents even bought this place. It was peaceful then. Time felt slower. I think I missed that. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for anything." Clara understood that more than she expected to. "That's what I came here for too," she said softly. "Silence. I thought it would help me figure out my life. Did it?" "Not yet," she admitted. "Maybe I'm still trying to listen." Evan chuckled quietly, the sound warm even against the storm. "Then you're already doing better than most people." A strong gust of wind blew rain across the porch, and Clara shifted closer to him instinctively. He noticed but didn't move away. For a moment, their shoulders almost touched, and she felt her heart beat faster. She told herself it was just the cold, the storm, the closeness, nothing more. But deep down, she knew it was something else. Inside, the laughter continued, muffled by the storm. Her father's voice rose above the others, cheerful and carefree, and Clara felt both comforted and distant from it. The porch, the rain, and Evan's quiet company felt like a world apart. A small, suspended moment she didn't want to end. As the thunder grew louder, a flash of lightning lit up the lake. Clara flinched slightly, and Evan turned to her. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her pulse raced. He gave a reassuring smile. "I used to be scared of storms too. My mom would make me sit by the window and count between the lightning and thunder. Said it made the sky less scary. Clara laughed softly. That's actually kind of sweet. It worked, he said. Sometimes I still do it. She looked at him, surprised. You still count? He grinned a little. Old habits. Another lightning flash came, followed by thunder seconds later. Clara started counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. When the thunder hit, Evan laughed quietly. See? It's not so bad. Something about that moment, the way he laughed, the way his voice softened when he spoke, stayed with her. It felt strangely intimate, like they were sharing something personal without needing to explain it. The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle after a while. The air filled with the smell of pine and wet soil. Clara leaned back against the wooden beam of the porch and sighed. I can't remember the last time I just sat like this. No noise, no phone, no plans. Evan nodded. That's why I like this place. It reminds you how small the rest of the world really is. She looked at him then, really looked. His face was calm, his eyes reflecting the gray of the lake. He seemed like someone who had made peace with his past, even if it had taken him years. Clara admired that. Do you ever regret things? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Sometimes, he said finally, but not the way you think. Regret isn't about wishing for a different past. It's about realizing you didn't notice the good moments while you were living them. Clara thought about that. I think I'm guilty of that too. Most people are, he said softly. The wind blew gently across the porch, carrying the faint sound of the lake returning to calm. The world felt smaller now, quieter, as if the storm had taken all the noise with it. Clara realized how close they were sitting. Their hands rested side by side on the railing, not touching but only a breath apart. The warmth of his presence filled the space between them. Neither of them moved or spoke. Inside, her father called out something about dinner, but she barely heard it. The world outside, the soft rain, the fading thunder. The steady heartbeat of the lake was louder in its silence than anything else. Evan finally stood, setting down his mug. We should go in before your dad thinks we've drowned out here. She laughed quietly. Yeah, we probably should. As they turned to leave, Clara glanced at him. There was something in his eyes, not just kindness, but understanding. A silent recognition that something had passed between them tonight. Something delicate but undeniable. When they stepped back inside, the warmth of the fire greeted them, and her father looked up with a grin. You two survived the storm. Barely, Evan said with a soft chuckle. Clara smiled, taking her seat near the fire. But as the conversation carried on around her, her thoughts drifted back to the rain, to the quiet porch, and to the strange connection she had felt with Evan, something she couldn't name but couldn't forget either. That night, long after everyone went to bed, she stood by her window and looked out at the lake again. The storm had passed, leaving the water still and glimmering under the moonlight. She thought of Evan, of his calm voice, of the way the world had felt different beside him. And though she told herself it was just a moment, a passing thing, her heart refused to believe it. Something about that night felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet see but already felt deep within her. The rain had ended, but inside her, a quieter storm had only just begun. The storm passed quietly during the night, leaving behind a sky washed clean and a soft, golden light stretching over the lake. The morning air smelled of rain and pine, the kind of freshness that made the world feel new again. Clara woke to the sound of birds and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. For a moment she lay still, remembering the storm, the porch, and Evan's calm voice beside her. Something about the memory made her chest tighten, not painfully, in a way that reminded her she was still alive, still capable of feeling deeply. Downstairs, her father and his friends were packing up. The weekend had come to an end. Mark was already making jokes about how sore his back was from the cabin beds. Daniel was trying to find his lost fishing hat. And her father moved from room to room, making sure nothing was left behind. The house, which had been full of laughter the night before, now hummed with the quiet rhythm of departure. Clara stood by the stairs holding a cup of coffee, watching them move around. She felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Part of her wanted the house to be quiet again, but another part, the part that had awakened during the storm, didn't want it all to end so soon. She didn't see Evan at first, and that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Then she spotted him outside by the dock, checking the small boat her father always kept tied up. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair still damp from the morning mist. There was something steady about the way he moved, unhurried and thoughtful, as if he belonged to the calm that followed the storm. When she walked down to him, he turned and smiled softly. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, sipping her coffee. "Everyone's leaving soon." "I know," he said. "Your father was talking about driving out before lunch. Roads should be clear now." Clara nodded, glancing at the lake. "Feels strange, doesn't it? How fast the weekend went by." "It always does," Evan said, looking out over the water. "That's how you know it meant something." She smiled faintly, but there was something bittersweet about his words. The sunlight danced over the waves, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was too much in the silence, the kind of quiet that carried everything unspoken from the night before. When her father called for her from the porch, she excused herself and went to help pack. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of bags, laughter, and goodbyes. Mark and Daniel hugged her warmly, teasing that they expected her to visit next year. Her father seemed happy, lighter than he had been in months. But when everyone started loading their cars, Evan lingered behind, standing by the steps with his hands in his pockets. "You're not leaving with them?" her father asked. Evan smiled a little. "I think I'll stay another day. There's some work I can help with around the house. The shutters need fixing. That railing out front could use new nails." Her father clapped him on the shoulder, grateful. "You sure? It's a long drive back." "I don't mind," Evan replied. "Besides, I like the quiet here." Clara's father thanked him again and finally drove off with the others, leaving the house suddenly still. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the faint hum of insects by the lake. For the first time all weekend, it was just the two of them. Clara stood by the porch, watching the dust settle on the empty road. "You didn't have to stay," she said. Evan shrugged, smiling gently. "Didn't want to rush back. The city can wait a day." She smiled back, unsure what else to say. There was no plan, no expectation, but the quiet between them felt easy, almost peaceful. They spent the next few hours working around the house. Evan replaced a few loose nails on the railing, while Clara painted the window frames. The work was simple, but they talked as they went about her job. His work in architecture, her mother's old garden, and the small memories that made up their lives. It wasn't flirtation. It was connection. Honest, effortless, real. At one point, she stood on a stool to reach the higher corner of the window. "You're going to fall if you lean any farther," Evan said, moving closer. "I'm fine," she said, laughing. But just as she reached up again, the brush slipped from her hand. He caught it before it hit the ground. "Told you," he said, handing it back with a grin. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Guess I owe you one." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said, his tone light but warm. The sun climbed higher, and by afternoon they were both sitting on the steps, drinking lemonade and looking out at the lake. The air was calm again, almost too calm. Clara felt a quiet ache inside, not sadness, but the weight of knowing this peace couldn't last. Evan glanced at her. "Your father said you work in marketing." "Yeah," she said. "Long hours, constant noise. Sometimes I wonder why I keep doing it." He nodded slowly. "I think everyone wonders that at some point. Maybe we just stay where we feel needed, even if it's not where we feel happy." His words hit something deep. She didn't respond, just stared out at the lake. After a moment, she asked softly, "And you? Are you happy where you are?" He hesitated, then said, "I think I'm learning to be." Clara smiled faintly. "That sounds like a good place to start." As the afternoon faded into evening, they decided to walk along the lakeshore. The water was still, reflecting the sky like glass. The air smelled of wet grass and pine, and every step felt slower, quieter. As if the world itself didn't want to interrupt them. When they reached the old dock, Evan stopped. "I used to sit here with your father," he said. "We'd talk about everything, work, life, what we thought the future would look like. I don't think either of us imagined how fast it would all go." Clara sat beside him, the wooden planks cool under her hands. "I think that's how everyone feels," she said softly. "We blink and years disappear." He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes steady and kind. "You remind me of your mother," he said. "Not just how you look, but how you listen. She used to sit by this lake and say it had a way of holding things for people. Memories, love, even the things they couldn't say out loud." Clara felt her throat tighten, but she smiled. "Maybe that's why we both keep coming back?" Evan nodded. "Maybe." The sun began to set, painting the lake in shades of gold and rose. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, of everything neither dared to say. Clara wanted to ask if he would come back next year, but the words caught in her throat. Then, as if he'd read her thoughts, Evan said quietly, "You'll be here again next summer?" She turned to him, surprised. "I think so." He smiled, eyes warm. "Then I will too." The simplicity of his answer made her heart ache. There was no promise, no confession, just understanding. As they stood to leave, she looked back one last time at the lake. The reflection of the fading sun shimmered across the water like a secret only they shared. When they reached the porch, Evan said, "Thank you for staying up during the storm. It was nice not to watch it alone." Clara smiled softly. "Thank you for not leaving." That night when she went to bed, the world felt different, quieter, gentler. She didn't know what would happen next, whether they'd meet again or if this connection would fade into memory. But she knew this. Something real had happened here. Something simple but lasting. Her father's friends had all gone home, but Evan had stayed. And as she drifted into sleep with the sound of the lake outside her window, Clara realized that, in a way, she had stayed too, not just at the cabin, but in that moment, in that feeling, in the quiet beginning of something she didn't yet have words for.